fantastic. Everything's just wonderful. The information's there. Everything works. It's trustworthy. No, it's not. We haven't actually talked about hallucinating machines, but it's a phrase that comes up. And this is, if you search for pictures like this online, it's very easy to find them. Genuine fake watches, temporarily permanent, because that's the information they've been given. And the bucket of cold water really comes down to the fact that it doesn't matter how smart your machines are. It doesn't matter how fantastic your artificial intelligence may be, how big your LLM, how multiply secure your blockchain is. Garbage in, garbage out has always been true about computing. It always will be. So GS1, the barcode, for people who don't know, it's the company behind the barcode that goes beep at the checkout several billion times a day. We have to try and see what we can do to improve the traceability of products, so that you as consumers, you as retailers, you as business partners can have a better idea of where this stuff comes from and whether your brand, whether your integrity, your reputation is going to be improved or damaged by selling or working with a particular good. So one of the technologies that is clearly full of potential for this is verifiable credentials. And I'm currently leading a very small team of consultants who are helping to provide the information that the higher-ups than me need to make a decision on whether GS1 should adopt verifiable credentials. That is to provide a little tiny knowledge graph with some cryptographic wrapping and proof of origin and tamper evidence, so that you can use that in fantastic systems like the one that Origin Trail offers. You know, verifiable credentials have been around a long time. Nothing new about it. This is the email that went out to the W3C working group for the first meeting in August 2014, when Manu Sporny got everyone together. That wasn't the beginning. In fact, actually, it was my job at the time at W3C to tell him he couldn't have his working group because there weren't enough people who wanted it. He had to convince me that there were. I'm glad that I did eventually say yes. But he wasn't the first. This goes back even further. You may recognize Kalia Young and Phil Windley, who've been running IIW, the Internet Identity Workshop, for many years. This is from their website, and 2010 wasn't the first one. These technologies have been around for a long time. They only really came to any kind of prominence with the rollout of the COVID vaccines in 2021, and a lot of COVID passports, proof that you had received your COVID vaccine, did use that verifiable credential technology. So that was a big boost, but that's 3 years ago. And you still don't see it every day. This ISO standard is relevant. It's about the mobile driving license, and that is seeing take-up. This is a map of take-up of digital driving licenses, not necessarily verifiable credential ISO licenses. California famously, if you have a digital driver's license from the DMV in California, it is a verifiable credential, issued by the DMV and verified by the DMV. Right, the only party involved in that sequence is the issuer, who then also proves that, yes, they issued it to you. You don't see things like this in the real world. This is actually the kind of knowledge graph that we'd love to see. This is something from work that's been done at UNCFAC, the UN Transparency Protocol. And it's a grossly simplified diagram trying to show you that you've got two sources of raw materials. You've got lithium coming from Australia, and you've got copper coming from Canada, and they go off to China to be processed, and then from there it ends up in a European gigafactory to make the battery for the car that ends up being recycled. And it's got this lovely idea that there's an event which is captured using some sort of standardized process, and the data is captured, and that's wrapped up in a verifiable credential that is secured and passed on to the next person and the next person. And there's this wonderful network effect, this distributed knowledge graph of provable, trusted data from a mine in Canada, a mine in Australia, all the way through goodness knows how many different plants in China before it ends up. You think that's real? You really think that's going to happen? Be great if it did. But I don't think it's actually going to be quite as beautiful as that, so that you can press a button on your edge node of the origin trail and get all this information and know that it's accurate. That's the bucket of cold water. Let me try and make it a little bit less cold and a little less bucket-shaped. When we at GS1 are trying to establish whether it's worth us embracing this technology, so that when you get a barcode, when you get a GS1 identifier, you also can get with it a verifiable credential that says, yes, we know who you are, yes, we issued you this number range, yes, we trust this partner. We look at that and we are looking for positive signals, reasons why we should. I've just given you a bunch of reasons why we shouldn't. So one of the reasons we should is there are some people around the world who are really, really encouraging us to do it. Vinny Annunziato, a name many of you probably won't know, but he works for the US Customs and Border Protection Agency. Senior guy, getting money from the federal government to spend on developing verifiable credentials in this trusted network of data, particularly in the Silicon Valley Innovation Program. This is quite an old photograph of Vinny, but he's very much a champion and desperately wants GS1 to get on with this. Manu Sporny, I've already mentioned, the key person without whom none of this would be being standardized at W3C. This guy is from Singapore. He's not quite Vinny's opposite number, but he has a similar role in the Singapore government in that he is promoting digitalization of supply chains. John's going to talk about digitalization shortly. And he's very much in favor of the kind of technologies, the underlying trusted data through to the artificial intelligence agents that today is all about. It's 3 individuals, all of whom, well, 2 of whom are approaching retirement, one of whom has more energy than most people I know. It's built on a very shaky pillar of individual people. And when they go, we're genuinely not sure who's going to pick up the baton after them. Who is going to be the next champion? When Vinny retires, who's next? When Manu says, I've done my bit. When Sin Yong says, yeah, okay, I've done my bit, it's time to move on now. So this idea that everyone's going to suddenly start doing this depends on individual champions, individual enthusiasms. Let me give you some good news from right here in Amsterdam. Our colleagues at GS1 Netherlands will issue you a verifiable credential to back up your GS1 identification. And the user of that is the biggest marketplace here in the Netherlands. If you're not from the Netherlands, you will need telling that Bol.com is way bigger than Amazon in this country. Way bigger. Amazon is barely here. Sorry, Charles, it is. But Bol.com, which is a branch of Albert Heijn, is the big one. And what Bol.com does, if you've got a GS1 verifiable credential, their 7-step onboarding process to get you onto their platform goes down to 4. In other words, they save a lot of processing time, which is usually people, to onboard new suppliers. So that's going really well. And now people from neighboring countries, because GS1 is distributed with lots of different bits of independent thing, all called GS1, which is really confusing, are saying, oh, I want a verifiable credential, GS1 Belgium Luxembourg. Can I have one? And GS1 Belgium Luxembourg says, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so on. But it's definitely a success story, and they're issuing something like 10 a day. So that's a real cryptographically secure, tamper-evident bit of data that you can put in a trust graph and do something cool with. Back to Vinny at the US Customs and Border Protection. He's actually not looking for perfection. He knows that that graph with everyone doing everything isn't quite going to happen. But if you turn up with a container load of stuff at the port of Los Angeles, and there are like 10, 15, 20 bits of paper, but 3 of them, just 3 of them are verifiable credentials, that gives him 3 positive signals that you're one of the good guys, and you're going to be on your way quicker than somebody without. So it's about adding legitimacy. It doesn't have to be perfect for this technology to be useful. Sin Yong in Singapore, I spoke to him recently at the W3C get-together, and he said, I've been trying to get you guys to issue VCs for years. Get on with it. So we have that. And I should also mention our friends at Origin Trail are also very supportive and encouraging GS1 to get involved in this technology so that those product identifiers that go beep at the checkout come with more of a secure background to them as well. And we shouldn't be too upset by the fact that the technology is old. It's now more than 10 years since my boss first presented the idea of what we now call GS1 Digital Link, this idea of taking those barcode numbers and putting them in a string of characters that, as well as being a string of characters that you can read with a scanner and extract that number, it's also a URI. So it'll also go online. So that dual-use barcoding that we're now rolling out across the world is now recognized by every print and scan manufacturer on the planet, all the major ones. I don't mean there are some smaller ones, but all the big ones, right? The Domino printing, the Zebra scanners, the Data Logic, all those people like that, right? So that technology is more than 10 years old and is now rolling out massively. So you will see in the coming years, you will notice that that one-dimensional barcode that most of you are far too young to remember life before that will gradually be replaced by a QR code. And that'll go beep at the checkout, and you can scan it with your phone in the usual way. Another old technology called EPCIS. We first standardized that at GS1 in 2007. Not a huge amount of take-up to begin, but this is the standard that allows you to record the fact that thing was produced on this date, packed on that date, went on the back of a truck on this date, arrived at this port on that date. It's this events tracking through the supply chain. We released version 2 back in June 22, and that is now seeing far more take-up. It's baked into, for example, this United Nations transparency protocol I mentioned earlier. So technology can be quite old before it actually gets its big day in the sun. Schema.org, which is how you describe products online in a way that machines can easily find and understand it. This shows you the graph of the growth of the schema product class online since 2016. You see some major jumps there. It's being used to a great degree. But schema.org itself dates from, I think, 2011. So you don't necessarily have to release a technology and suddenly everyone's using it. You can allow time for it to build. So what are we going to do? Well, the first thing to say is I'm not in charge of this, and I'm now trying to work out how to go back. I want to go back to there, right? This is important. As I say, I'm not the decision maker. I'm the person working with the consultants to provide the information for the decision makers, but they will not be making any decisions before the end of this calendar year. So everything I'm going to say now is entirely speculative, and it could be that none of it happens. So I don't have decision-making authority, but I do have a certain influence. So here's what I think might happen. If you go to GS1 Netherlands and you get one of those verifiable credentials with one of those blocks of identifiers, they will do some background checks on you. They'll make sure that you've got a Dutch Chamber of Commerce registration. That's not true for all our GS1 offices around the world. Some of them say, oh, your credit card worked, great, here it is. That's the due diligence, your credit card worked, right? It varies enormously. New Zealand, they actually run the business register for New Zealand, so they've got really good, solid due diligence. So what does it mean that you've got a verifiable credential from GS1? We have to harmonize that so that if you see one in your distributed knowledge graph, you actually have some sense of how trustworthy that may be. And most of our members haven't heard of verifiable credentials, they're never going to ask for them, they have no idea what we're talking about. And most of our colleagues don't know what it is and have no idea what the applications might be. So we have a big job of educating people. And we need to do it in such a way that we don't repeat the mistakes that I expect we've all made when we try and explain something from an engineering point of view and no one gets it. And marketing tell you that doesn't make no sense. And version number 10, you might get something that people actually understand. I've had that experience explaining why putting barcodes in URIs is a good thing. Not to mention the number of times I have to explain what a URI is rather than a URL. Anyway, but we need to do various things. There's a lot that we need to do, and which is almost nothing to do with technology. It's about the socializing. It's about getting the community together. So that's what we might be doing. And what we're recommending is do that and stop. Don't invest a lot of money in making this dead easy to use. Don't go in for a GS1. You think of the kind of stuff that Branimir was showing earlier on with those different components and the complexity of the user interface and the ease of use and all that kind of work that Origin Trail's doing to make it easy to use. Absolutely fantastic and bloomin' expensive. And I cannot justify to my bosses that GS1 should spend that kind of cash, even supposing we had it. Can't. So do the basics. Do the things that we must do, lay the foundations, lay the understanding, get the community involved and engaged so they want it more. And then see what we can do. Let's have more of those GS1 Netherlands examples. What else can we do working with the US Customs and Border Protection, working with supply chain experts like John, who's on next? For what happens after that? Well, that, as always in our work, depends on what industry does. It also depends on you. What can you do with it? Is it useful to have an identity on this shipment, on this product that has a greater degree of trust, or possibly a greater degree of trust behind it than just the barcode that you have today? It's ironic that every presentation I've seen here so far today has ended up with a QR code. Part of my job is to get the world to switch from one-dimensional barcodes to QR codes, and I don't have one, but thank you anyway.